Hello. Sometimes it's too easy to take trees for granted. In a world that gives little credence to the virtues of silence and dignity, perhaps the most silent and dignified things of all, trees, are not being given the respect they deserve. But if we allow them to, trees can teach us many things about our souls, about our very being. Trees can maybe even give us meaning.
All hand, bees and trees. My window on the world is my stomach, and trees give us the finest foods in the world, fruit and nuts, and from bees in hollow trees, honey.
My name is Shelley Griffiths, and I've had a love of trees ever since I was a girl. And now I work for conservation with Tree Spirit.
My name is Alan Watson Featherstone. I've had a passion for trees for as long as I can remember, and I'm currently the director of Trees for Life, an organisation working to restore the Caledonian forest in Scotland.
My name's Glennie Kindred, and I'm particularly interested in the native trees of Britain and their folklore, and how they can be used today for our healing.
My name's Ted Green. I care for trees and I worry about trees, especially ancient trees, and I'm a founder member of the Ancient Tree Forum.
I'm John White. I'm a dendrologist. Basically, that means I'm a tree person. I've recently retired from the Forestry Commission after 39 years' service.
Lenny, perhaps I can start with you. Do you think trees have different personalities? Individual types of trees have different personalities?
Yes, I think of it as trees being like different countries have different personalities, like the British personality is very different from the Spanish personality. So I think of it as different tree species as having a different personality from the next tree species. And I came across this when I was sitting drawing them. And as I sat and drew different trees, I had a very different feeling with different tree species that reoccurred. So I was able to come to this understanding.
Would everybody agree with that? Different trees?
I would, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I would go a bit further than that, actually. Personally, in my experience, there's differences between different tree species, but individuals within a species also have their own character and personality too.
Yeah, that's true too.
I mean, they've all grown in unique situations. They've maybe got twisted branches or bits broken off, and to me, every tree is as individual as each human being. And yes, a Spanish person is different from an English person, but somebody from the north of England is different from the south, and so it is with trees, you know.
Yes, I agree with that, but there is also a collective picture.
Yeah.
Take it but from the scientific point of view, of course, every tree is an individual, because every tree is actually an individual support system for fungi, because you have fungi living with the tree, and if you're able to strip away the bark and the living tissue and even all the wood, you would still be left with a sort of a gossamer type framework of the tree.
Yeah.
So, and we're just beginning to understand what trees and fungi go together.
I'd widen it further to whole woodlands, because whole woods have a feel and a smell.
Do. Oh, yes.
And winter time in a deciduous woodland may be cold and noisy. In an evergreen forest, it may be quiet.
Yeah.
There's so much difference.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you find, as tree enthusiasts, do you find yourselves giving individual trees individual human characteristics?
I don't know. I mean, well, I suppose you do it because you're human, you see. It tends to be that's the way you communicate. You think about it in those terms. But I would say their auras are, we're going back, being individual. Their auras, they give you that, and then you sort of decide where you are with that. I mean, some trees are scary. I mean, they are scary. You know, and some trees are beautifully healing and inviting and welcoming.
Old friends.
Absolutely.
I visit hundreds and hundreds of trees, and I sort of not quite greet them, but
Yeah.
I think of them as old friends and sort of slap them in the same place that I slapped them 50 years ago,
Yeah.
especially at the old oaks at Windsor that Ted's so much involved with.
What, in the way that you'd slap a human on the back, you'll slap a tree?
Oh
Almost,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
My tree as a kid, my Queenie tree in Yorkshire that we were sent to when we were kids. We lived right in Bradford by the mills. There was no trees where we were, but my aunts lived out in Baildon, so off we went for the summers. And it was great because Queenie, where we went, that was our mate. That was one of our mates.
Right, yeah.
Right, and we went up. That's where we spent our time, and it was terrific, you know. You know, we talked, we did all the things that you do as kids around in and on trees, and it was quite natural to talk to the tree all the time.
There's several historic trees too, dotted about all over Europe. There are links with the past, and they're revered from that point of view, from their historic connections.
I once visited the Africa's biggest tree in the Kalahari Desert, and the missionaries would use it as a post box. They'd, you know, Livingstone would put a letter there, and he'd go up to Victoria Falls, and somebody else would come back and get the letter and take it home. And this, I should say, was a very big tree, very, very big.
The other thing that I was thinking of was the last tree of a variety of apple called the Shropshire Lady's Fingers, and I got that in my mind when we were talking about particular trees and that sort of creaking and hollow, and that again I have very strong feelings because it's the last remaining one of that whole set of varieties of apple, and that's creaking along. It has been for 15 years, I've known it for 15 years, and every year I expect it to go, so every time there's a gale or extremely sort of bad weather during the winter, I sort of wake up and wonder if it's still actually there, and quite often phone up to find out if it's still okay. So a very strong sense of connection there, and that's actually then, I've grafted from that and collected a whole sort of, well, several hundred trees have planted of that particular variety. So very strong feelings.
But old creaking trees don't fall over. It's the strong, healthy trees that blow over. The old creaking ones are there because they're old and they're
roots
creaking.
are so well gone.
And they're hollow, and because they can bend and twist and they're very light on their root system, they survive. It's a classic strategy for a tree to survive, to be hollow.
I was interested, Shelley, in what you said. I hate to go into negative characteristics so early on in the discussion, but we all think of trees as being very nice things, and I was interested in you saying that some trees you found scary. Are you talking about specific trees?
Yeah,
you've come
specific
across?
trees.
Like what?
Well, there again, going back to when I was a kid, where Queenie was, further down the sort of, it was like in a bit of a gorge, right, and down the bottom there was an old, I can't remember, I think it was a sycamore, but that had been broken in a storm, part of it, you know, and it was a bit dodgy, you know, it was dangerous down there because some of the, you know, the branch was, you know, and we used to dare each other to go down and a bit more, you know, and so there was that was felt a bit sort of, you know, for us at that time, it felt a bit scary. And as an adult, I found, again, it can also be connected with your state of mind when you go there as to whether you feel they're scary as well.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is it your perception of scariness, or is it an actual imbuing
and conditions
of
and the environment, the weather, what's going on when you get there. You know, that can give you sometimes a feeling. But it soon passes if you persist. And you're there for a reason.
What do you think, Alan? Do you think that
Personally,
trees can
I
be
don't
scary?
I don't have any experience of trees being scary myself. I don't live in a world in which nature is threatening. I think, you know, that perhaps makes me different from a lot of people in the world who have this image of hostile nature. For me, nature is my home. And I think what you were saying there about how it's the consciousness with which people go out that makes a difference. I remember one time in my life going out near where I was living and going in the woods at night and having this thing, oh, it's dark, it's scary. And then I thought, well, hang on, these are the same woods I walk through every day. These trees are my friends. There's nothing to be scared of. That's only what I'm bringing in my head.
Yes.
So I think that ties in with your question too about, you know, taking human personalities and projecting them on trees. And as human beings, I think we tend to do that naturally.
Oh, we do that naturally,
and that's one of the things I try to do in my own life, is to step aside from that, you know. I won't slap a tree, I'll hug a tree and imagine, you know, my toes growing down as roots or whatever, and try to feel what it's like to be a tree, and that gives a very different sense then. It helps to get beyond a little bit of the human perspective.
If the trees have souls and personalities, do you think that they're actually feeling, you know, do you think they're actually trying to communicate with us about the pollution and so on, or not?
I think possibly not in the way that we would like to think they were, because pollution, well, carbon dioxide pollution to a tree is food. We think of it as poison, but they live on it, and in return they give us oxygen. So I think they look at it from quite a different point of view if we want to personalise them.
It is ironic. Do you agree, Glenn?
One of the things I felt over the last few years is that we've lost our working relationship with trees. Like, the best of us will enjoy looking at trees and walking in the woods and maybe hugging them and stroking them and like being with them. But we don't actually work with them anymore. We don't use them for our herbal remedies, for our medicines. We don't use the wood. Most people don't think in terms of, well, I have a new baby, I'll make a cradle for the baby. What wood was traditionally used? It was silver birch, was traditionally used as because the sort of all the trees throughout all our folklore and history have various folk customs attached to them, which all the people, even the people in London, you know, 100 years ago, would have had a relationship with trees. They would have gone and they would have picked from the elder trees and made their cough mixtures from the berries, and they would have made their beauty treatments from the flowers, and everyone would have had this relationship where they went to the tree, spent time with the tree, gathered from the tree, probably felt thanks for the tree. It's gone.
I coined a phrase, the working tree. Man and the working tree, because if you look back into our past, it was only when forestry arrived we actually started to cut trees down. Before that, every tree worked for its living. This pollarding, which is the beheading of the tree, which you remove the new shoots or the growing branches from where you beheaded it, that would have been used for innumerable uses. Your fruit trees, they were working trees. Working trees are still around the world, rubber, you name it. When we've moved away from that. But if you look around London, especially around London, you can find these areas where the trees were actually cut for fuel. And that was shipped into London.
And is that a good thing?
Well, that's
or a bad
Yeah, well,
thing?
yes,
because they were pollarded,
I mean,
killed.
Daft, you know, you can't say never cut a tree down. That's
No,
insane.
it wasn't cut down.
You know, whatever, never use a tree. You
They
know,
were
whatever.
used. You didn't cut the tree down.
For whatever reason, I mean, it's our one totally renewable resource. We can put back all that we take. We can keep on going and going and going if it's done properly.
I remember hearing on the radio, there was a radio programme about, is it the aspen tree, which you used to make matches, and I remember the guy on the radio said, but don't worry about chopping down all these trees, because aspen trees grow faster than people
I want to be specific about that. I don't mean like generally cutting trees or a thing. I mean management of wood for specific purposes. Ancient woodland should be left alone. All ancient woodland, all specifics and those kind of relationships.
Can I just qualify that a tiny bit? We talked of coppice, and hazel coppice in particular I'd like to mention. If you leave hazel coppice as a component of ancient woodland alone, it lives for about 60 years and dies. If you coppice it, it will live for 600 years plus. And it goes further than that. Small leaf lime is the best possibly in Britain example of this. That if you don't coppice small leaf lime, the tree will live for about 200 years. If you coppice it, we know that some of the coppice stools are 2,000 years old, the roots.
Again, this goes back to
and
relationship.
it may be older still.
What's coppicing?
Coppicing is rather like Ted said, cutting the branches off the top. It's like cutting the branches off at ground level. It's in effect cutting the trees down, and they come again from their roots.
But they send loads and loads of shoots up, not just a one central trunk.
You mentioned
it used to be a
aspen,
traditional way of managing trees in the past on a sustainable basis,
there's
and something that we've lost now.
Led on to other
in most
things,
parts of our culture.
and
There's
all
a difference
that
in
sort
there
of
between
thing,
actually cutting trees down and getting rid of forests or woodland.
Big
There's a difference in the two get confused in a sentence very easily.
The aspen tree you mentioned is a really good example because you can cut down aspen as much as you like. Very often a whole forest of aspen is all one tree because it just grows as a huge root system and suckers.
Well, the guy
and you cut the suckers off.
Well, the guy on the radio said that aspen trees actually grow faster, and I remember this very clearly. He said they grow faster than you can chop them down, and I then immediately envisaged a terrifying world of aspen trees going past it.
Very true.
And having to employ.
I know an aspen tree on a golf course.
Have
you got that many?
There's an aspen tree on a golf course at Chepstow. It's 1,000
Well, no,
stems.
it would be like the day of the Triffids.
There is some research that shows that aspen does proliferate more after massive disturbance, a fire or something like that. But one of the interesting things about aspen now is that in the States, there's an aspen tree there now which they say is the world's largest living organism in Utah. They've given it a name, it's called Pando, which means I expand in Latin. And it's 42,000 separate trunks covering over 50 acres. And they're all interconnected because they've all grown off the same rootstock. What's more, they also say that this tree theoretically is immortal because some die, some keep going, new shoots come up, and it's the same organism. Nobody knows how old it is. And that tells me just a little bit of how little we actually know about trees. You know, we look at them and we say, oh, there's a tree there, there's a nice tree, it's an oak or a beech or whatever. We're only seeing part of it, and we're only seeing a little snapshot of it in time.
The thing is, you're obviously all very, pleased about the immortality of the aspen tree, but some would actually find that, strangely chilling, that the aspen trees can just take over, and if we're not careful.
But that's the alienation of city dwellers, isn't it?
That's
Because
again
it's,
what we were saying earlier about
in the 60s, people discovered that children in Birmingham thought you sliced cows in half to pour the milk out. They didn't know where milk came from, and the same with carrots. They came in plastic bags, and the same happens with trees. Even in country towns, in Ludlow, when I did work with children there, they didn't know they could eat blackberries. So you've got this, and people probably don't understand that apples come from trees. And we did a programme recently where somebody didn't understand what blossom was and what it was for. And that, to me, is an extraordinary thing. It's just a natural part of my life to understand that things grow out of the soil. They grow either into trees or into food crops, and you eat those. So you're eating from the soil, you're eating from trees. But some people don't understand that connection. You go to the fridge and that's your alienation then from the natural world. So then you might be frightened of it.
Yeah.
I think we should put people's mind at rest and introduce a timescale to this. Aspen does certainly spread fast, but the lime, which is perhaps the best documented ancient plant, coppice tree, the one that's 2,000 years old in Gloucestershire it's less than 20 metres across, 60 feet across in 2,000 years. So I think it'll take a long time to take over the world.
Yeah, they're beautifully self-regulating, aren't they?
Tree hugging has had a really bad press, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, it seemed to be
fear, isn't it?
off the wall.
People, people are frightened when they see things like that.
And also people embarrassed. Oh, isn't it terribly embarrassing hugging trees? There's that British thing, But no, it's great. It's lovely.
I think it's a question of an old versus a new paradigm, and we have an old paradigm in much of our Western world, which is the one we've been discussing, of separation from nature, people losing contact with their forest heritage. And what I think is happening now is there's a renaissance of feeling for that, particularly amongst the younger generation, who are a lot of the people who are hugging trees or camping up in them or living in them to protect them being cut down. And it's people are rediscovering a need for connection with what's real in the world, with nature. And in those circles, there's nothing wrong with tree hugging at all. It's actually a way of extending ourselves to connect with what's around us in the natural world.
The road protesters of the last couple of years, I suppose, I think have done a tremendous amount of good. The generic feeling about people like, the obvious example is somebody like Swampy who's becoming a national hero. It's extraordinary, and it's wonderful to see that there was a lot of cynicism about.
I was actually amazed. My father is a very straight-laced, severe sort of building society manager sort of person, and I was absolutely astonished. He hated the Beatles. They had terrible hairdos, and they smoked drugs, and they did all of these sort of things, and all this sort of very hard, sort of serious sort of discipline that's sort of come down the ages from my father, and Swampy turns up on the television, he thinks he's great. I was absolutely, totally wiped out. My father actually thought Swampy was all right. I couldn't believe it. And that's a sign of, to me, a sign of the times. Vegetarians always used to be seen as dope-smoking, sort of bead-hanging sort of people. And again, now Swampy's okay, the environmental movement is okay, organics is okay. Again, trees have got to be welcomed back in, because we've got to sort out trees, haven't we? We've got to actually make them very much a part of our landscapes and our lives. Again, the problem that I'm facing really is orchards have been wiped out. 90% of orchards have disappeared across Britain. We've lost said that's the British connection.
Oh yeah,
with
it's a nightmare. We've got no apples
are
left. We used to
quintessentially
have hundreds
English,
of
and yet we've got
kinds.
hardly any connection between children and they don't know what scrumping is. Now, a nation whose children don't know what scrumping is, serious problems, serious problems.
I'm
Loss
not
there, big
entirely
loss.
certain what scrumping is.
Scrumping is where you leg it down the road
no,
to the vicarage, usually, if you lived in a village or in a town. If you went to the because vicars
Grab
usually
them
had the best
apples.
orchards, and you hopped over the wall or the fence and you went up the tree, stuffed your pockets full of apples, and sort of, here's one here, stuffed your pockets full of apples, nipped down and went somewhere quiet and ate them. That's scrumping.
Yep.
Stealing is where you go up the same tree with carrier bags, pinch all the
And
apples and
getting
take them
too
down the
many.
local boot market and sell them. Now, that's the important distinction. Scrumping is natural, it's like poaching. It's an excellent thing to do. Children should be encouraged to go
Yeah, because
scrumping.
if you over scrump, you get bellyache anyway.
It's a traditional country
so-
craft. And so our children should know what to do with trees. They should climb up them and eat them.
Going to the loss of orchards, you can also extrapolate that into the countryside and say the loss of hedgerows and the loss of trees.
Yeah.
And I coined
Yeah,
the
the two
phrase
are
several
connected,
years
yeah.
ago, and I called it the Great British Treescape, because
Yes.
I want all you people to go across to Calais and start driving. And when you drive, you realise that we have a fantastic treescape here, which is still full of lots and lots of old trees.
Oh yeah.
We've got probably 80% of the old trees left in Europe. I know that's hard to believe, but that's
does,
north
yeah.
of the Mediterranean, of course, because south of the Mediterranean they've got a lot. And one of my theories on that is, of course, that we've been very crafty. We've never had a war in our country. We've always fought our wars in other people's lands. And I think this is how the old trees have suffered in the rest of Europe. But go to Europe and you'll see that they've got any old trees, not orchards, by the way, but old trees, and they revere them. Wherever you go, you'll find them on maps.
We may not have any wars down in the south of England, but there's certainly been wars fought up in my part of the country, in Scotland.
Absolutely, and we chopped loads of trees down to build
wars
ships
led to the
forward,
destruction of
didn't
a lot of the forests in
Hundreds of them.
Scotland.
Yes.
And
Particularly, you know, a couple of hundred years ago when most of the English forests were destroyed, and
That's right.
there's a lot of records of some of the best examples of old Scots pine being cut down for ships.
And
And
oaks.
into
yeah,
Wales
to the
again, a lot of
Armadas,
forests were
yeah.
cut down purely for
Yeah.
military reasons.
Yeah.
But
So
we've
you-
still
you've
got
just-
80% of the old trees left in Europe. Whatever. They haven't got any.
Yeah.
Germany's got 200 or something.
That makes us
A
better than
few.
the rest of Europe. It actually means we've still got a paltry amount of
Yeah.
natural forest
Yes.
compared to
Yeah,
what we originally
what we
had.
used
What
to
it means
have,
is that,
yeah.
those woodlands and those old trees are incredibly important, and we are the custodians of those.
I have a theory about this. I think in this century, although you're right, we've had no wars on our soil, thank goodness, but in the 2 world wars in this century, our woodlands have been absolutely decimated, and the trees that have survived are the trees that weren't worth cutting down. And this is my personal crusade to save trees, is to make them non-commercial. Spoil them in some way. Pollard them dead if you
Yes,
want
yes.
to.
Pollard.
This would prolong its life. Pollard, cut the branches off, would prolong its life. Also, it's likely to start rot going down the centre. Perhaps I'm wrong on that, Ted will put me right, I'm sure.
But it's
But
so
you're
brutal,
being
though,
cruel
isn't
to
it?
be
It's so
kind, aren't
brutal.
you?
Being cruel to be kind, that sums it up, I feel, very well indeed.
Wouldn't a more positive aid to this be that people changed their attitude towards trees and saw them as being a great help to us?
Yeah, that's
And Going
fine.
back to this hugging trees, no, whoever hugs trees will not
Yeah,
laugh.
this is-
It's
this
only
is
the
fi-
people who think that that's quirky and cranky,
That's
the people
okay
who haven't
for
done
us.
it.
Mm.
and
But
Can I
haven't
ask,
felt the
have all of
benefits
you
of
here
it.
hug trees in your time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
That's it, what-
I want to talk about approaching trees, about how one treats trees. Do you have to approach them in a certain way? Literally walk up to them in a certain way.
Well, there are all sorts of theories about that. There are some
Yeah.
people who, if you believe, which I do, that we all have an auric body around us, that the tree too, all living things have an auric body around them, and that that the tree actually has several layers of auric body, and that you can. People say, theory, that you approach it from the north because that is the most sensitive side of the tree, or the least sensitive side of the tree. Yes, and that you circle the tree the way the sun circles the earth, so the tree respects you as being part of the earth. I don't hold with any of that. I think you just follow your own intuition.
Yeah, you can do it.
And
Tell us
go.
something.
Yes. Just go, you know, approach it with I think maybe, you know, a feeling of love and respect.
At a veteran tree conference recently, I actually advocated that people didn't approach ancient trees because there's so many of us with so many feet, and we're doing so much damage by simply compacting the ground around them, which they've not been used to for the last 700 years.
Is a typical example.
Well, the major oak
isn't
is
it?
fenced off, and quite rightly so.
Yeah,
If all the
because of that
millions,
reason,
if all the millions of people that went to see the major oak walked up to it and all patted it,
would
hugged
be,
it, it would be gone by now.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
I think what you were saying, Glennie, about approaching them with respect is the most important thing, because if I walk up to a tree, it's like walking into somebody's house. That's its living space. That's where the tree has been. And I wouldn't just sort of stumble in blindly into somebody's house somewhere. You know, I would actually approach it with a sense of appreciation and, you know, looking at it and really saying, yeah, I'm coming to see you, to
And when
be
your
in your
heart
living
is
space.
open, when you have a sort of open heart attitude, then you're also more ready to receive what the tree is giving out.
And what the tree is giving out to me, what I actually... I mean, I approach trees for this sort of stuff, so go up to a tree and eat it.
Can I have one of your cherries?
Again, it's not from the north or the south or anything else, it's just... You see the fruit and you want to go up to the tree and eat it.
Well,
and that's what trees are about.
Well,
Yeah,
I was going to
thank
bring
you,
you into
yeah,
this at this
yeah.
point, Paul, because you're more pragmatic about this. But I was wondering that is there anything that Glennie and Shelley and Alan are saying which you can identify with, even though
Yes,
your
very much so. I
approach
think
towards-
on the hugging side, I'm more of a handshaker than a hugger, and so I do love trees.
Do you feel a sense
a little
of
bit
thanks
nervous.
for your tree?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I bet he
Do you
says
feel
thank
a
you.
sense of
Yeah.
thanks for all
Yes,
the
very
fruit
much.
they
But
give
I
you?
sort of get slightly uncomfortable about this. It's a little bit cloyy, the hugging
Yeah,
and
so,
niceness,
yeah.
and so I'm not against it. It's just that I'm a little bit more sort of...
English.
Yes, I think so, and a handshake is fine. So I'm keen that actually children get the idea that you don't have to think about trees, you just sort of experience them, and that's an experience of a tree. And we actually started an oral reforestation society, so when you've actually eaten your cherry, then what you do is you go...
Right.
And there is a new cherry tree.
One, not actually there.
Not there.
In the curve.
But we can take it with us. You've got a nice little pile here and a nice little pile there.
Yeah.
We can take them.
Absolutely.
We
Get
can
them in
take
them.
them with us and plant them.
Yeah.
So we actually did a project with the local county council and various other people, and who've got involved. That's feeling, and it's very important. It's placing importance on trees and their products, but it's not hugging or doing all those things. So it's another way of actually expressing.
I want to
importance
ask
of
one more
trees.
thing about hugging, and I think we should move on because, as I say, hugging has had a bad press, and I don't want it to become, silly. But hugging, to me, is a very big step. There must have been the first time you hugged a tree.
Yeah, I bet you did it as a kid and you can't remember.
Well, maybe a first time you kind of made a conscious decision that I am going to go to this tree, and I am going to hug it.
I wonder if it's, first of all, you start by touching the wood
Yes, I
in
was going,
furniture,
yeah.
long before you ever experience a tree. And people do. I mean, this is
Of
a
course they do,
wonderful piece
yeah.
of furniture.
Lovely, lovely,
You-
yeah.
Yeah.
You can get the same, I think, the same feeling from doing that as you can from going to the tree.
Yes.
You know, touching the furniture just makes me think of, one of the sort of things we've inherited in our culture is we touch wood for luck.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Oh, there's all these
And that
wonderful
is
history
perfectly
of wood.
accepted.
Yeah.
So why do people have a question about hugging a tree then?
Yes, it's
You know?
just the next another step, isn't it?
It is, exactly, yeah. There's no rational reason
Yes, because
for
the tactile feel is the sumptuousness and the sensation and the smell and all that goes with the wood is adored by us already. Yeah.
I always remember this Roald Dahl story, which ended with somebody chopping down a tree and it's screaming in agony. I think, do you think trees feel pain?
I've sensed that.
Yes.
I've spent a lot of time with a chainsaw,
Yeah.
and I've had to fell a tree and leave another, and I get quite, and I sort of console myself by going up to the tree I've left and saying, look how much better it is for you because I've given you space.
Right. I read somewhere, and I don't know if it's true, that they do, trees definitely communicate with each other through pheromone and
Sure,
chemical. And when I heard somewhere that they were, like in Africa, that there was a study, they were trying to study why some trees were the giraffes were eating, and all of the trees, and these other trees over here the giraffes were ignoring. And they were trying to manage their park, you know, their wildlife park. And they went in testing for all kinds of stuff and tannins. And they found that when this lot were being browsed over here, the pheromones, the chemicals sent over to this lot, the tannin levels in these trees here went up so much that they were unpalatable to the giraffe. And that's just another
probably all weren't collected anyway. They'd be connected by fungi under the soil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we don't actually know how the message passes, but it does pass from one to another.
Right, it's just it's magical, there is, yeah.
How do trees communicate with each other?
Probably through fungi.
Probably
in the soil.
through chemical and fungi.
Well, we have to remember that, you know, when we see the trees, we're only seeing part of it. You know, half the tree is underground, and their roots are interconnected, as you were mentioning there, by the fungi that wrap around the roots. And there's a whole web of life which interconnects everything under the ground. It's invisible to us.
The actual trees will link together. The roots will actually graft under the ground. Because to produce a fruit tree, you're grafting a variety onto a rootstock. But underground, I'll often say that, I mean, that's a piece of grafting there. It's a piece of natural grafting on a yew tree. It's just two sections. This is
two trees.
But that process takes place underground more easily than it does above the surface. So trees will actually join together in a great big web.
Glennie, didn't you have a bad experience with the blackthorn?
Not a bad experience. It was when I had this idea I was going to make a special necklace with different woods. This is the necklace. And I sort of went about with my secateurs, asking various trees if they minded that I had a piece of wood to make a necklace. And it was just a very big no from the blackthorn. It just said no way, go away, you know. And I was quite shocked because I've always believed that I feel atmospheres around trees, and you know, I've sat with trees and been in woods and sort of understood that I can sense trees, atmospheres and essences, but this was so definite. I just put my secateurs back in my bag and scurried away. You know, it's like you're saying about cutting the tree down.
Some trees say go away.
You can, and some trees are very welcoming.
I couldn't think of a negative experience with trees when we were talking earlier.
But blackthorns aren't particularly, and their thorns are very
highly
septic.
Toxic. Yeah, I had a half-inch blackthorn thorn go into my hand here when I was actually got all my protective gear on, but I was actually laying a hedge. And it was half an inch long and went in there, and all the hospitals said, I went to 4 hospitals, they all said, oh no, we don't take organic matter out, like we leave them in because the body will absorb it. And I mean, I know with blackthorn, there's no way it's going to do that. No. And eventually they had to operate and take the whole thing out, but it was half an inch long. And my hand was sort of the size of a balloon by the time they'd actually got around to deciding that they would take it out. And a blackthorn can travel up, I've heard stories, that go in here, literally, and travel up all the way up your arm and come out of your elbow. I mean, just over a period of years, you'll just sort of move through. They are not absorbed in the body, so all doctors take note.
But they like that. If you come across them in the woods, you can't get through. A blackthorn thicket
is purple. There's purple colour onto the stems and the thorns, and they're extraordinary thorns and incredibly.
How do you cope then when blackthorn is only another plum?
You get the same thing with some plums. Yeah.
What about prunes?
So it's it is a problem.
I took I didn't know you were going to say this, but I took it to heart some years ago, this theory. I was asked to go and look at the Glastonbury thorn down in Somerset, which is documented as having shot thorns out and blinded someone, and someone else who tried to attack it with an axe had cut his foot off by mistake. And I was asked to go and look at this, and the custodian said, well, you can take samples if you like. I said, not likely, I'm not touching it.
We were talking earlier about approaching trees, about the best ways to approach them, and for those of us who've never thought about this kind of thing before, and they're going to be watching this TV show, and tomorrow, you know, we will find ourselves approaching trees. What should we bear in mind?
Well, again, the biggest, we've all said it, respect. That's the first thing. Respect and try and take it from there. And the openness is very important, as Glennie said. The openness and the willingness
enjoy them.
to enjoy. Yes.
Just go and enjoy trees and remember that they're very, very important.
Stand back and admire them.
Absolutely.
And they give you dinner.
Yeah, the lungs of the world plus ocean and stuff.
I think we forget to follow our intuition. We're not encouraged in our society to follow our intuition and listen to it. You know, you're considered a little bit off the wall if you maybe, you know, have an intuitive thought about trees or.
But that is changing, isn't it?
It
And I
is
want to go
changing,
back
yes.
to the
But
I want
it's
to go back
trusting
to
your
the
intuition a bit
swampy
more.
business because I I find it absolutely fascinating and I think it represents a change in British culture. I think 10 years ago there was a culture of cynicism and antipathy and negativity.
But those people
And-
were still tree protesting, or not them maybe in particular, but they were still.
Absolutely,
You
absolutely.
know.
But the way that the media and the way that the general population is changing towards them.
absolutely disgusting that they have to go that far to get people to listen and put themselves and their lives in danger. Yeah, what else can you do? You know, what other passive way of protesting without going out there and being violent, like the violence that comes at them? You know, what else do you do when these people are so deeply involved? They're at their wits' end about it. You know, and the local people too. Local people are not listened to. All this British thing about these public hearings, it's all a whitewash. We don't do it right. We even have public hearings. The people at the public hearings who are in our councils say, yeah, we agree with you. And then so that another part of the government will come and say, oh, well, we're not listening, whether you all agree about it or not.
If you look at
know.
most of the motorways of Britain, you'll find they go through all the woodlands.
Yeah.
So in other words,
It's
the
a
easy passage is to take it through
It's
a woodland
disgrace.
because the agricultural industry, of course, is so much more vociferous
It's cheaper
and has
then.
power in the places where it needs power. So all the woods get joined up by motorways.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable how I mean, like Sherwood Forest, for instance, I was with some people back there a year or so ago, and the road that was coming through, this is like, actually the local people didn't know half of it, what was going to happen. And they were putting an access road in. It was nothing to do with traffic, to alleviate traffic or blah, 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 blah. It was an access road for BT. And there was loads of the sector they could have gone through. Oh, no, they wanted to go through the old part, you know, because it was nearer and all this rubbish.
And also it's seen as non-productive.
Yeah, it was just outrageous.
But
you know?
Sherwood is a good example of a misunderstanding of how trees work. Yes, they were proud of their ancient trees, but in the days when they designed the car parks and the information centres, they put the information centres and the car parks under the old trees.
Yeah.
And now we've got this big problem, perceived problem of safety. And we've got to get information centres, car parking and other facilities away from the trees. And we still see it today. You provide people with a car park, and then there's some grass, and the people try to drive out of the car park onto the grass and park under the tree. And it's the worst possible thing you can do from all angles.
But are you sensing a change? Are you sensing a change in your lives that people are treating you with more understanding?
I think there's been a number of events that have catalysed things in recent years, and one is obviously, you know, the protesters, you know, against the road expansion through ancient woodlands, but I think also the great hurricane 10 years ago in 1987 reawakened a lot of people to the importance of trees in their lives, where suddenly some of the trees that they'd taken for granted, you know, they'd grown up with, got blown down, and it's like people realise, oh, there's something important here.
And Glennie, how have things changed towards you?
Well, I use the batch flower remedies quite a lot of which are trees. I think people's attitude towards healing, my particular thing is more reconnection to the trees as a form of healing. Not only through the herbal,
Medicines,
the old
yeah.
herbal
Yeah.
remedies, but also through the sort of newer methods in terms of batch flower remedies, and healing, that our healing doesn't just happen on the physical, which modern doctors treat the physical, that healing is something that happens in our auras, in our etheric bodies, and that the trees are a great help to that, even in the simple terms of just spending time with trees. But you can be more specific and actually take a remedy. You know, different remedies for different things that will actually help you on the physical level. So you take these remedies which affect your emotional personality and how you go about your life, and that in its turn affects what happens to you physically. So people are more open to this sort of thing.
And Jon, I'm interested because you're more pragmatic, I think, than some of the other people sitting around. And I want to get a sense of well, I can't quite work out how many differences there are in for instance, the idea of the spirituality and the auras of trees with the more pragmatic approaches. So are you agreeing with most of what you're hearing in the more esoteric?
Well, I'm not disagreeing with it, and I respect what people say and think. I think that trees can look after themselves whatever we do, and most of what we do is for our benefit rather than for the tree's benefit. It makes us feel good to do some of the things that you've been saying. I don't know whether it makes the tree feel any better, but it must help, because if people do this and they feel better about it, they respect the tree more, and the tree is more likely to survive this present chapter.
Again, in one way or another.
Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself in an ethical dilemma, Jon? You have to chop down a tree. Maybe you've got a choice, Sophie's choice, but tree-wise.
Yeah.
Do you have to decide which of these two trees to chop down?
I mean, I wouldn't want to be labelled a crank and talk to the trees, but you almost have to go up. A lot of my work early on was thinning out forests to get the best trees to go on to be even better trees, which involved cutting down a lot of the mediocre trees, and you'd easily fall into the sort of, not exactly a trap. You'd almost ask them whether they see their prospects as good or bad. And yes, you've got room to go up there, and you haven't much room there, and there's two of you who are equal, so one of you's got to go.
Like kind of voluntary redundancy.
Absolutely, yeah. But I would always console myself by going and sort of, if you like, telling the good trees that I'd left how much better they were because I'd left them.
Yeah, there's a wonderful African saying that fits in with that, like with voluntary redundancy, and that is, I think if I can get this right, when the axe came to the forest, the trees said, "The handle is one of ours."
Right, good point.
Right, and it sort of fits there.
Yes.
Is it true that you can make a whistle out of a tree in 30 seconds?
Approximately.
Go on then.
Shall we go? Okay. Because yes, I mean, I feel it's important that we have a very direct sense of connection with trees. I'll just rootle and find my knife. Oops.
What's this called?
These are called wetwood whittled willow whistles. And
the process is
I think
the process
children
of
need
whittling.
to be able to cut trees down and get very direct experience and eat them and make things out of them. So again, I'm slightly differ with your perspective of being very, very nice and very, very soft and very, very gentle. But it's a and I also think that people with bow ties can care about trees as well. It's very important that we don't exclude some levels of society from caring about trees because of the way they dress.
Or because they hug them.
I didn't think for a second.
While he's doing that, can I say that's a piece of willow
just let it rest
osier,
there while I whittle.
and that the roots of that plant could be many hundreds of years old. This is a case where the top's cut down perhaps every year, every other year, but the roots just go on and on and on. So he's not doing any harm to the tree.
It's a beauty, isn't it?
And that is the most ecologically sound way to irritate people.
That's extraordinary.
Yep.
I was wondering, I don't know much about talking sticks, but I think that's one. Who does
Yeah,
this belong?
that belongs to me and Tree Spirit. Yeah.
What does it do? All I know about talking sticks is that they're called talking
Well,
sticks.
it's a Native American tradition that we've sort of pinged a bit, and the actual where it comes from, and it's used in powwow and mediation and discussion, rather like what we're doing now. But it can go round the circle, and the theory is the person who has the stick is the only person who speaks, and everyone else must respect that. Okay. It's also an instrument, a noisy maker, a rowdy rebel. Right, get your attention, listen up, okay? and it's used for singing and dancing, and it can also be used in ceremony too. Okay, yeah, and it's hazelwood with a twist in from honeysuckle. Lovely natural twist in there, beautiful. And it's forked and twisted, which has some significance spiritually. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but it's very, very lucky, right? And well, I've had a few things. I mean, you know, I've had one, you know, at Glastonbury, 1 or 2 people have tried to pick it up and walk away with her.
Well, I think it would be an interesting exercise. I don't know how long we've got left, but for the rest of the discussion to take place, talking tree-wise.
I actually have something very similar to this. It's not a talking stick as such, but it is a piece of hazel with another honeysuckle twist on it. It's really beautiful. I got it in the New Forest somewhere. We use that tradition sometimes up in our groups too, of having not necessarily a stick, or it could be a stone.
It can be just a it can be a, yeah.
You can't speak just now. But something that actually helps to shape and guide a discussion, because it can be very useful from that point of view. I think there's a lot we can learn from native cultures around the world. Going back to the thing of tree hugging again, I mean, that's a big tradition in India now. The Chipko people there have been protecting the trees in the Himalayas by hugging them, for example. And most traditional peoples around the world still have a very important role that trees and forests play within their societies. The people who we often look on as primitives or savages actually are much more sophisticated in their understanding of the relationship with trees. I don't hit you in the face with that bit.
But before we leave, I'd also like to show my little sticks, which are healing sticks, and I have quite a little collection of them, really. This is yew. Different qualities of the trees, I feel, within these bits of wood, because they're a bit of the tree. And even if they're not, they remind me of the qualities of the tree, so they serve the same purpose. And I make lots of these, and they all go. People can't resist them. They're just lovely. They're lovely to hold, but I make hundreds of them, and they just disappear. They're lovely. You just stroke them, and you just gain something from being with them. So whether or not it is the true quality of the tree, doesn't matter, I don't think. It's just nice to have a piece of wood. Stick it in your pocket, get it out, have a fiddlesticks, I call them.
Okay. Thank you. I have 2 sticks now. I'd just like to say something about this actual stick, because people are very much aware that honeysuckle strangles trees, and it does. It takes a long time, and the honeysuckle flowers and pleases the bees and us and everything else. And it'll, if it were left, if it hadn't been cut, this branch or this stem of hazel would have been killed by the honeysuckle. It was broken off probably. But never fear, because down here, this piece of hazel is probably coming from a root which could be 600 years old. And it needs to be cut off to stay alive. If you didn't cut it off, it would turn into a hazel tree. And hazel trees by nature bend and bend and bend like this, so the tree is like a rainbow.
They're bendy as bendy.
And then when you get a bit of snow, which we don't get a lot of these days, but you get a bit of snow up here, it presses down on here, and the hazel tree pulls itself up by its own roots and dies. So it's not the end of the world when you cut down hazel or when it gets honeysuckle. Its head.
Well, it's a fascinating piece of wood, but I've noticed that most people have brought props, and I was asked at the beginning of the thing, where's your prop? And I thought, I couldn't get my prop in this room. My prop would be probably an ancient oak tree, which just wouldn't fit in here. If we could only get back to saying trees are as much a part of our lives, and this patronising way we have to the rest of the world. We think the world is here for us, and we've just been talking about that now, saying how different things about how, if like the Red Indians live with their trees. And if we could get back to thinking what the trees are giving us, not necessarily in a spiritual way, but just from the point of view of cleansing the air, of making us calm when we walk in their woods, in amongst them, and we evolve with them. I think this is the key thing.
Yeah. The old tree syndrome. We need more of them, and you were talking about pollarding and actually ending up with hollow trees. And it reminds me that I run an organisation called Bees and Trees, and that's supposed to be fruit trees and honeybees, but the natural home for honeybees, that's why I made the comment about beeswax.
Oh, right.
The natural home for honeybees in these islands, this latitude, is actually hollow trees. So if we don't leave hollow trees in woods, if we cut them all down for timber or whatever, if we don't have spoiled trees in your terms, or ones that aren't good for timber, left standing, then we've actually cut out the home of the key ecological species that I see them as. Honeybees are the key indicator species. So trees actually provide the home for bees.
Well, I just want to encourage people out there, okay, to get in touch with trees on whatever level, you know. And we said it again, I'll say it again because it's worth saying, with respect, especially young people, especially children. As we said, we need to do this.
And enjoyment.
And enjoyment, yes. And it was one of the things that Tree Spirit does, the conservation group that I'm involved with, is to try and do this and try and make sure that we pass it on and pass it on and pass it on, because it's crucial.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
We could pass this round all day. But we won't. Good night.